Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast from PI's Reproductive Rights and Privacy Project. My name is Sarah Nelson, and I lead the Reproductive Rights Project here at PI. Today, I'm speaking with Nandini Archer, who is Open Democracy's 50/50 Project's assistant editor. Open Democracy, as I'm sure you will be aware, in early 2020 put out a major expose about the Trump-linked religious extremists that target women with disinformation worldwide. And I spoke with Nandini about the investigation, which was global in scale, and that looked at rogue pregnancy centers, crisis pregnancy centers that provided partial and misleading information and sometimes false information to people seeking pregnancy support, pregnancy care, and pregnancy options. Their investigation focused on pregnancy centers that are affiliated with Heartbe International. And as you might be aware from our previous podcasts, PI has been looking into the different technologies that Heartbe International is developing and promoting for use by their affiliate centers globally. And so I was really interested to speak with Nandini about what they came across when people visited these pregnancy centers affiliated with Heartbeat, and what sort of non-medical information the people that visited the centers were told, and then understanding sort of how Heartbeat International is coordinating talking points from its headquarters in the US externally to centers around the world. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Nandini Archer. Nandini is an assistant editor at the 50/50 Project at Open Democracy, and she covers stories relating to gender, sexuality, feminism, and social justice. She co-authored a recent piece entitled "Trump-Linked Religious Extremists Target Women with Disinformation Worldwide." And the piece details how a global network of crisis pregnancy centers are targeting those seeking pregnancy and reproductive health information and services with disinformation, emotional manipulation, and deceit. Open Democracy sent undercover reporters to these pregnancy centers in 18 countries and documented the experiences the reporters had, which included being encouraged to delay emergency contraception, being provided training materials claiming that, quote, condoms do not do a good job at preventing pregnancy, unquote, and staff at some centers offering ultrasounds without having medical qualifications. All of the centers visited by Open Democracy undercover reporters are affiliated with Heartbe International, which is the well-funded US-based international anti-reproductive rights organization that I've previously discussed in an earlier podcast, and PI has done previous research on as well. Heartbeat grabbed PI's attention because of the variety of technologies that they're developing and promoting to their affiliates globally, including website templates, Google Ads, Google Ad Assistants, digital intake forms that seem to streamline data collected from those visiting crisis pregnancy centers, and much more. So given the scope of Open Democracy's reporting and the sort of overlap with what we do here at PI, I thought it would be interesting to speak with Nandini about their experiences and hear more about the investigation. So welcome to the podcast, Nandini.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I guess to begin, I'm curious kind of why you guys focused on Heartbeat. I know that you've been working on it for months and months, and I'm wondering sort of why you were drawn to Heartbeat International.
Yeah, so we're a group of investigative journalists and we work on a global news site, as you said, Open Democracy. And for the past few years on the gender team, we've been working on a project called Tracking the Backlash. So that means we've been investigating the backlash to women's and LGBT rights around the world, looking at things like how organized opposition are trying to block or roll back women's and LGBT rights, looking at their activities, their tactics, their cash flows, and what impact this has on people's lives on the ground. And so last year around the European elections, we worked on this project where we tracked the financial filings and the money that 12 US Christian right groups were spending in Europe. And we found that there was $50 million of dark money being pumped into Europe over the last decade. And one of those groups that we looked at was Heartbe International. And so this year, what we wanted to do was look at what exactly this money was going towards, what they were spending their money on. And Heartbe International in the US has hit the headlines a few times for sometimes, running these kind of crisis pregnancy centers and looking as if they advertise abortion services. So we wanted to see what they were doing around the world in other countries as well. The project had various parts to it. So to begin with, we started by analysing the 10 years of Heartbeat's US financial filings. And so this showed that they had spent $1 million around the world over the last decade, which doesn't sound like that much, but the really important thing for us is that it gave us the names of specific grantees that they were giving money to. So places in the names of specific centres in Ukraine and Mexico, for instance. So we wanted to follow this money to the ground. So we found reporters in 18 countries where we knew that there were Heartbeat affiliated centres. And so we kind of started by mapping these different affiliates, looking at what their connections were to the US, looking at what their connections were to Trump's White House, for instance. And then we sent these women undercover. And I mean, so some of the things women were told were, I mean, obviously there was a lot of kind of abortion increases the risk of cancer, abortion can cause heart attacks, abortion can increase the likelihood of you abusing your children, all these kind of things. I think for me, what I found most shocking was a few reporters, for instance, posed as women who'd experienced domestic violence or incest or rape. And in those instances too, what they were told were quite shocking. So in Israel, our reporter said that she had gone out with her first cousin, who she didn't know that well. She suspected her drink had been spiked. She was now pregnant. She wasn't sure what had happened. And the advice of the crisis pregnancy center was along the lines of, well, you're now 30, maybe your time has come, maybe you should marry him. This is her first cousin, supposedly. Then in Argentina, our reporter said that she was in a domestic violence relationship and she was pregnant, she was facing an unwanted pregnancy. She was told, well, now you're a victim because of this domestic violence, but if you have an abortion, you will become part of that violence. So there were a lot of examples like that. And then there were quite strange things, like in both Uganda and in South Africa, for example, our reporters were told, well, you could be killing the future president if you have an abortion. So a real range of things. And then other places where abortion was, we kind of did this research in a variety of different contexts. So in some places like Mexico City and South Africa, abortion is legal. Ukraine, Italy, abortion has been legal for many years. In other places, it's not. But things like contraception is legal. And women there were also dissuaded, like in Uganda and in Ecuador, from accessing both condoms and emergency contraception. So in the case of Uganda, for example, our reporter went with another younger woman who posed as a teenager and said that she had been raped by her uncle and that she was now pregnant. And the kind of crisis pregnancy center gave her a lot of different advice. In some instances, they seemed kind of sympathetic, but then they were also saying, well, the incest is partly your fault, and then really dissuading her from using condoms and really encouraging her to use so-called like natural methods. So yeah, a wide range of quite shocking findings. I think as well, one of the things that, the most scary thing in a way is the way they advertise themselves and promote themselves. And they, you would be totally forgiven in many of these contexts to go to one of these centers and think that you're going to get kind of accurate abortion advice. In many of the Latin American countries, they advertise on websites like howtogetabortion.com or like abortionmexico.com. So it's like, that's the really deceptive thing.
In the misinformation that people are told when they visit a clinic. How much do you think is coming from the trainings that Heartbeat has on their website?
Yeah, I think for that, I mean, we're not certain as to which centres did take the training or didn't, but we did have one reporter that took 2 of the online trainings. And again, many of the things she was told, looking at the transcripts, she was kind of like bombarded with this like barrage of statistics and supposed studies that weren't really very detailed or cited, which claimed that abortion increased cancer risks, and that, you know, abortion could increase the chances of your partner becoming gay, or that condoms don't work, although they did say that they don't work 3% of the time, which means that most of the time they do work. So I think that, yeah, there were definitely like a lot of similarities in what we saw in the training as to what we found when we went to the centres as well.
On their website, they seem to have trainings for like how to talk about abortion, and just generally different reproductive health care issues, but also how to promote yourself online and how to, like, you know, optimize Google keywords and extend web services. Heartbeat's sort of internal web development company develops those website templates for affiliated CPCs, and mandates that certain text is put on certain pages about abortion recovery, about STIs, pregnancy. And I was wondering if in the trainings that you guys have come across as well, if you've looked into any of like the digital training side of things as well.
Yeah, I guess we did see it really varied by context. So we noticed in Canada, for instance, a lot of the services would have a kind of disclaimer on their website saying we do not offer abortion services, and very similar wording. So I guess they must have been mandated to do that. And then yeah, some centres in some countries seemed a bit more unclear as to whether they were anti-abortion or whether they were, what kind of religious stance they were coming from. So it did really vary. I think one of the most troubling things about this investigation and what it shows is that Heartbeat International does claim very close ties to power, very close ties to the White House in particular. So Vice President Mike Pence has spoken at a number of Heartbeat's events in Capitol Hill, and Donald Trump has applauded a 2018 Supreme Court decision in favor of crisis pregnancy centers. So I think there are those close links to power, and of course we're not saying that like Trump and the White House are behind this all, but what this investigation shows is that there is this kind of coordinated attack on abortion rights and on reproductive rights more generally, and that these aren't kind of ordinary local people that are just concerned about abortion. It's quite a kind of coordinated attack, kind of backed by the rich and powerful. So to say that that's one of the important kind of findings. We've had quite a number of parliamentarians and lawmakers speak out based on this investigation, which has been really interesting. So we've had lawmakers in South Africa and Mexico City where abortion is legal. We've had lawmakers in Italy, and many MPs cross-party in Croatia, and also in Ecuador and Argentina, so many different places. In terms of, I mean, our role was to expose and to investigate these crisis pregnancy centres and show what they're doing. So we will be keeping up to date and checking in on what comes from these calls to action.
Has Heartbeat International responded to the research?
Yes, they did. So they said a few things. On the one hand, they're very much stuck by their trainings. They're very much stuck by their approach and the way they're kind of conducting themselves. They said that we had implied that they were a franchise, and they insisted that their centres around the world, their affiliates, are autonomous. So, I mean, there are a number of points here, because on the one hand, on their website, they say that they have these simple guidelines, right, which say that to provide, that their affiliates must provide women with accurate information. But of course, in many of the cases that we looked at, that wasn't happening. So in Spain, for instance, one of our reporters was given material that said that she would be 144% more likely to abuse her future children if she had an abortion. Like, that doesn't sound like accurate information to us. So if they're saying that their affiliates are autonomous, maybe, I don't know whether they're breaking their own guidelines. That's for them to decide. And then on the other hand, of course, this whole project started from this very intense data investigation where we tracked their financial funding. And so it wasn't just the case that we found that many of these centres were affiliates and had this specific status. At the same time, they were specifically being funded by Heartbe International.
Maybe we could go back to talk about specific examples of what you've seen. I'm curious if in certain countries you saw any patterns of what people were told, or if you could just go back over some examples of what reporters were told.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that reporters were told across many of the different countries were a real emphasis on how an abortion will destroy their future relationships or their current relationships. So in Ecuador, our reporter was told that if she has an abortion, it would kind of contaminate her and her relationships for the rest of her life, and that includes with her current daughter, and that by having an abortion, she'd be taking blood and death to her. And they said it would be like stepping on poop. The smell would go with her forever, and that kind of stuff. And in Mexico as well, our reporter was told something along the lines of, I mean, they just kept repeating her boyfriend's right to choose, and her boyfriend's that in order to have an abortion, she would require the consent of her boyfriend or a relative. When our reporter kind of really pushed on this and was like, is this really necessary? They were like, well, yeah, someone in charge is needed. The most common thing was the physical risks of abortion. So a lot of mentions of cancer, a lot of scaremongering around. In, I think it was Ecuador again, our reporter was told, like, that there's an increased risk of breast cancer, and your husband might, he won't be there when you lose your breast in surgery. So it's quite yeah.
Because the examples that you've given are quite extreme, and quite personal as well. I mean, they seem really tied to the individual that's seeking care. And I'm wondering if you get the sense that the organizations that are affiliated with Heartbeat are affiliated because generally they have the same sort of worldview, but the actual talking points that they tell people who visit the center are more kind of individualized as opposed to formalized through some sort of training.
I think that it's a bit of both. I think that with what we found in the trainings, they kind of encouraged their staff to really personalize things. So of course, it's the whole, one of the trainings, the whole way it was structured was as if it was a call with an anonymous woman who you never hear from. You just hear the center staff's response. And so I think they're really encouraged to personalize it. I think and then part of it will be their worldview, but it is this kind of, it just shows there's this like coordinated strategy, because it's not a coincidence that two people in two different places have been told exactly the same thing, being told that they could be killing the future president, for instance, in both Uganda and South Africa. So I'd say it's a bit of both. I think that in terms of, like, there was a lot of that in some contexts there were mentions of religion, or that you could be, that the fetus belonged to God, or that you needed to confess and you needed to ask for forgiveness from your womb, or go to church and these kinds of things. But again, that was part of a coordinated strategy, in my opinion. What our reporter was told in the training, so she was very much discouraged from telling women to use contraception. She was encouraged to delay women from accessing abortions and from accessing emergency contraception, and that those kind of delay tactics totally came up, like, across many different countries. She was told things like, I mean, the idea that abortion and suicide, that there were kind of strong links there, or like mental health problems, that again came up in many different cases.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, with a lot of what they were saying in these trainings, we then contacted global health bodies and experts in these fields to, you know, it seems like misinformation, but we're not health experts, so we had to check, and yeah, they've been like debunked by all of these global health bodies. If you think that these centres are legitimate, totally legitimate abortion clinics or centres that are meant to be giving you accurate advice, then of course it's going to be even more shocking. I think our reporter in Ukraine kept saying that, you know, like if you knew that this was a kind of backed by this ultra conservative religious organization, then you wouldn't be surprised, and you're like, yeah, okay, this makes sense, but they don't tell you that, so you don't know, and you know, so of course that makes it all the more troubling and, yeah, emotionally traumatic, really. Some of the centres in like Canada, for instance, online, they do say, you know, we don't provide abortion services and things like that. But sometimes, you know, it's not always. I think it was like about 50% weren't on their front page. It's kind of in small print. Like, women aren't going to be necessarily trawling through every single page of a website. So it's not even clear, even when they seem to try to make it clear.
Thank you so much for your time, and really interesting to hear more about the research, and looking forward to reading more about it. So thank you for joining.
Thank you.